Good evening, everyone. This is Nofil Janebi. I'm the director of Emirates Research Center for Happiness, and I would like to welcome you all to a new episode of our Happiness Research Talk. Our talks are aiming to raise awareness in the science of well-being and help policymakers to understand the implication of well-being. And today we are proudly to have Professor Micheal F Steger, who's the founder and director of Meaning and Purpose Center, and he's a professor of psychology at Colorado State University. Welcome, Professor.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me and taking time out of your day to speak with me.
Thank you. Thank you for agreeing to be part of the talk.
It's my pleasure.
So let me start with asking you this. Your work has been around meaning and purpose. When did you feel wanting to dig deeper and understand what meaning, purpose means to a human being and all of that? I want to know the backstory.
Well, I think a lot of it comes from just me as a sort of a curious person who just however I'm wired, I don't like to believe the first answer I get. And the more people that seem to believe it and be so sure of it, the more skeptical I get, I guess.
Okay.
So then I want to turn to evidence. I grew up in a very small town, and it seemed like everyone was so sure they knew how the world and everything worked, and yet they never left this little town. So they
Hmm.
couldn't have had the data necessary to be that confident, right? So I thought, there's got to be more to this. There's got to be more to
Wow.
life. There's got to be more to the world than what meets the eye. And so that's really just been always my nature. I mean, I'm not an argumentative person, but I'm just like, I wonder if that's the whole story, right? So that's been my nature. And I kind of struggled and bounced around for years in my young adulthood, trying to find a way to make a difference and do good
Mm.
in the world that didn't have too high of a cost, I guess, on me. So I
Mm.
was working in a lot of associated mental health fields, like working with adults with schizophrenia or autism spectrum disorder. I was a drug and alcohol counselor in a high school for a while. And all that direct help was really impactful and good. And I
Mhm.
think I was effective, not fantastic, but effective. And but it was just very emotionally draining to me, because I think for me it's the mental adventure is easier than
Mm.
the emotional adventure. So I started to go back to graduate school for my PhD with the desire to really just do more assessment and supervision, because those are little intellectual challenges. And then I just fell in love with research. And I didn't go to grad
Interesting.
school thinking I wanted to be a researcher. So I still believed in this idea that we are craving meaning in our existence, that there's more than just getting money from someone, buying some garbage, and then giving money somewhere else. Like, that can't be life. That can't be life. That just can't be life. So there's gotta be some heart to it and some soul to it. And that's what meaning meant to me. So I said, I
Mm.
want to study this. And a lot of people said, you can't study that. And I said, let's find out, because I just happened to be in
Okay.
a university, which is all about, if you can get data, you can convince us. So
True.
that,
Hmm.
yeah, so it really works. So for me, so I just started getting data, and then, yeah, I mean, the field has exploded in the years since, and it's been an interesting journey. So that's it. I just had this curiosity, decided I wanted to pursue it, was well equipped by an excellent training program to do so, and yeah.
I guess curiosity and love of learning are one of your top strengths, aren't they?
they are they are, yeah, yeah.
Interesting. So, speaking about finding meaning, is there a specific age do you think one will be able to find his or her purpose and meaning in life?
I don't think that there's a specific age. I think it feels when I've looked into this, and it like a developmental milestone. Like, I would say that there's some
Mm.
people who are 70 years old who just have not decided that meaning is and purpose is relevant to the way that they live.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's other little kids who just feel open to the idea. So I think that there is some evidence that there's some personality factors at work in um, how excited people are about meaning.
Mm-hmm.
But in terms of age, I don't think so. I think that there's been research on pretty young kids who are able to articulate ideas about what the purpose of their life is, for example,
Interesting.
age 8, age 7. I've got a little story about my own son. I used to, I created a meaning in life questionnaire, and so a lot of my scrap paper had print offs of that on the back. So I'd bring it home, and he'd draw robots or whatever he was drawing. And he was about 6, maybe 7 at the time, and he had drawn on one side of these meaning in life questionnaire forms and flipped it over and
Mhm.
started filling it out, circling the
Wow.
numbers. And I was like, "Hey buddy, what you doing?" And he's like, "I'm taking this test." It's like, "Oh, what's that test about?" He's like, "If my life is meaningful." And I said, "Oh, okay, well, what do you think?" He's like, "Yeah." Like, okay, so you think your
That's
life is meaningful?
impressive.
That's really cool. What do you think about that? And he's like, "I think it's good." I was like, "Well, why do you think that your life is meaningful?" He's like, "Well, because I wanna help."
Hmm. Hmm.
You know what I mean? So I think that
Yeah.
if we pose it as a deep philosophical question where you have to read dead philosophers to be able to have an answer, then there's not that many people who will care enough in the
True.
topic. But if we pose it as, do you want your life to have a positive impact and some reason to go through all of what we go through and to make choices that are sometimes difficult, then I think a lot of kids and a lot of folks can really latch onto that notion.
Mm-hmm. True. So I have another question regarding parenting and developing meaning and purpose. So do you think the way how the kids are being brought up and will that help them to develop meaning?
Yeah, I think we do a pretty bad job as a society, and this would include parents and educators and public officials, anyone involved in the sort of fabric of society. We just don't talk about the topic. Like it just doesn't come up
Hmm.
most of the time. And if we don't talk about it, we don't ask about it, and we don't model in our own lives our own successful pursuits of meaning and purpose, or our own struggles with meaning and purpose, or what drives us, then
Mm-hmm.
we're leaving it up to people to just absorb, I guess, without
Yeah.
any tools for actually building meaning on their own. And I think, we see the most recent two generations, the millennials and the Gen Zs, they're supposedly super motivated by meaning and purpose, right?
Hmm.
Like they want to have good jobs, but also meaningful jobs. They want to, somehow save the world from the baby boomers and the greed and all of the, what are the growth minds, not the growth mindset, but like the just the desire for economic growth at all costs. Like they want to rescue the world, and so they've got this like calling to meaning, but I think that they don't have
Hmm.
tools to do that. So they're just attracted to things that feel important. So I think with almost, unless we give our kids as we raise them the tools to build meaning, then it's just going to be another one of those things that we hope they pick up somewhere, like
Yeah, that's true.
good study skills or a moral compass and things like that.
Hmm. So, do you believe that there are certain topics that we can have with our kids on the dinner table that might help them think about purpose and meaning?
Yeah, for sure. And they're not topics that we are ourselves trained to talk about, so it feels awkward. One of the things I've noticed, at least in the US, is, and well, honestly, in other countries as well, but I think particularly the US, it makes the least sense because we're such a superficially happy culture. You're just supposed to smile and have a nice day, and you're just supposed to keep a smile on at all times. Um, we are very shy. Like we feel very
Mm,
vulnerable talking about good things in our lives. Like we like
okay.
talking about the things that fulfill us or are deeply important to us. I think we feel vulnerable
Hmm.
about that because then Like, what if someone makes fun of us for the thing I care about? Like, it's much easier to make fun of other things or complain about teachers or complain about these rules aren't fair. I should be able to stay out all night if I want to, or
Mm,
like, so we're similar. Like how, like I think that I see a tendency for people to want to call on a external higher authority, right? So we see people refer
mm,
to, well, why should you vote? Well, government is important for this, or religion tells us that these are the most important moral virtues and actions. But we don't often as parents talk about our own individual way of navigating what's
mm,
important in life and how we've made choices in our lives and whether those choices have been good and whether our lives feel meaningful, and then how we decide if our life is meaningful and what we would do to make it more meaningful, or when we've
true.
actually made decisions to do something that feels meaningful. So unless we're talking like that, then our kids are going to be just as much in the dark as we are, and we're just we're just hoping we make the right call, you know.
Yeah, that's true. I always have that conversation with my husband, like hoping whenever we decided to have kids, is that we don't force them to make choices, but we sort of like give them guidance. So this option might lead you to one, two, three. So the consequences of option A, option B, etc. But later, then who knows? Are we going to be able to only just give them options, or do the same thing that our parents did? Actually, they've been literally forcing us to make a certain choice that they believe it's the best for us.
Yeah. I mean, life goes so fast when you're a parent too. You know, like the choices, the decisions, the years just shoot by so fast. It is hard to stick to a plan of, okay, well, let's really process this and what might happen there. And, how you, what information are you consulting to make this decision? And, how did your last decision make you feel? And, where do you, like, what steps can you take towards an important direction in your life? I mean, there's like,
Mm,
those are hard questions. It's much
very
easier, like, well, you
difficult.
should take you could take calculus and just eat your dinner and go to study. I mean, it's like, life is fast. So I
That's so
get that.
true.
Personally, I get that.
Yeah, we'll see though. It's a
I
it's a
think,
it's a
so
challenge.
it is. I think that if we break it down into some core skills, then we can foster those in lots of different ways and start to connect the
Mhm,
dots, right? So, you've talked about like how you would want to provide guidance. Like, so here's some things that might happen if you make choices like this, and then what will it be like to be on the other end of those choices and seeing what might happen
mm,
there.
mm,
Like those are actually key skills to processing things meaningfully, right? We need to have the ability to put ourselves in a future circumstance
mm.
to see if it's right for us. We need to
Okay.
be able to abstractly reason. We need to understand kind of who we are so we can simulate what outcomes will be better or worse for ourselves. We need to also then decide, okay, so let's say we've gone through these three choices and we think number one, well, that's what everyone wants me to do, and it'd be easier to do that, but I don't know if it's for me. Number two, that's just disaster. And number three, this is like my little personal passion, but I feel shy about it.
Mm,
So how do we help someone? Like, we need to help our kids navigate those choices. And then once they choose, to feel like they can pursue those choices. Like, so then they have to generate a sense of motivation, and keep their aims in sight, and you learn from failure. All of those things can be really important for filling out the meaning toolbox, if you will.
mm,
So in some
mhm.
cases, it's really a matter of making sure that we're just building the tools that we need for life anyways.
Okay.
But then labeling and making those connections and helping people see, like, well, this is how those tools can be used to pursue meaning and purpose. And here's how I did it in my life. And it was accidental, so maybe I could have done better, but like, so that's how it worked for me.
Interesting. So it's about perhaps developing some core values that will help them. Yeah.
That's a
Um,
huge component.
mm, indeed, indeed. So this will take me to the question that I wouldn't say that we should have asked at the beginning, but how would you define meaning and purpose?
So it's a little bit of a tricky question, but I'm going to say that meaning and purpose is the way that the field has referred to this topic for a long time, since Viktor Frankl began writing about it in the 1930s and 40s. And he had the advantage of those gigantic German words, which can have so much meaning, and so translating into one word in English was difficult. So he just used this big bucket term. And
Mm-hmm.
I think that different scholars and people have been attracted to one bit or the other of it. And I've just tried in my career to figure out how everything can fit in the same tent, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I would say that meaning is the bigger topic. It's kind of meaning in life is the big tent, and the tent rests on three pillars. So the first pillar, we'll just say purpose then, right? So purpose is having an overarching, having one or more overarching, really important, individually valued dreams almost in life
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
that help you make choices and drive your motivation. So there's a motivational component to meaning. The
Okay.
second piece I typically talk about as if it's in terms of coherence, but it's really the idea that we can make sense of life and we can understand who I am, what the world is like, how everything works. I can
Mm.
take new information and new experiences and do something with that. You almost think of like a narrative ability. Like I can think
Okay.
of myself and add new information so that I can understand my life. And so that's a cognitive component. And then the third dimension is significance. Some people call this mattering. So this is this idea that my life
Mm.
matters, life is worth living, my own individual life has value. There's a reason to be alive. It's almost like a gut feeling. So almost everyone can
Interesting.
evaluate meaning on that level. Like it's just like, is life important? Does it matter? If you can say
Mm.
yes, then you've got that sense of significance. So then we've got this kind of evaluative, almost emotional sense that I can't exactly say why, but yeah, my life matters. We've got this cognitive sense, like as things happen, I can make sense of them and I don't feel overwhelmed by chaos. And then we've got this motivational sense, like I can target important things that make my life that are worthy of the gift of life and do and
Mm.
do and move towards those. So that's really a very long way of saying meaning in life is about
Three
motivational,
main
cognitive,
pillars. Mm.
and evaluative pieces that make it feel like life is significant, makes sense, and has purpose to it.
Interesting. How one can know actually if they have meaning and purpose in life?
So the philosophy that I take is that for questions where you can't find a data-driven answer to, it's best
Mm-hmm.
to leave them up to interpretation. So I don't think that there's a way to go through, there's actually weirdly enough debate, but I don't think there's a way to go through and rank each person's life objectively on whether it's meaningful or not.
Okay.
Like there are people who feel like that's true. Like you could theoretically just judge another person's life up or down, meaningful or not. I don't think that makes any sense to me. So I
Mm.
think that it's best just to ask people, So I'm
Mm.
interested in whether a person's life feels meaningful, not whether some authority, overarching authority would judge that life to be meaningful.
True.
So the implication then is if you feel like your life is meaningful, then we can measure that and we can study the consequences. And that's what really the research of meaning in life over the last 20 years has been built on.
So, is it possible for one to develop meaning and purpose? Like, what tips would you give for one to develop meaning and purpose?
Well, so yes, for sure. There is research out there showing various programs that can help and even little interventions. There's really two flavors of this. One is really deep work, so
Mm.
if you think about the question, I want my life to be more meaningful. Meaning isn't just like tricking yourself into smiling more, or it's not like just making a list of nice things that happened. It is about your entire existence. So to make your life more meaningful might mean that you need to live a little differently,
Mm-hmm.
or learn skills that you don't have right now. So there's a lot of evidence from folks who are dealing with cancer or chronic disease or chronic illness when they go through like a meaning-centered therapy or group support program, that their meaning increases, their depression goes down, their health goes up, you know. So if you so there's that sense that like re renovating your life's meaning is going to take some work.
Oh
So
yeah.
it shouldn't have it shouldn't have like a little sticker. You put the sticker on it and you're like, hey, more meaning, you know. So so there's that piece that feels satisfying to me. So that would be saying that efforts along the lines of psychotherapy,
Mm-hmm.
where you're really building insight and new skills and perspectives, that's for sure. I think there's good evidence for that. The other side is like lab experiments, and there's these that
Mm.
seem to have short-term boosts in meaning, and some are not related to meaning that much. Like if I'm able to make you get in a better mood, have more positive affect, life will feel momentarily more meaningful to you. I mean, that
Interesting.
does suggest that if you can become more happy over the long term, you might also feel life is more meaningful, since we know that those two variables correlate together. And from an emotional standpoint, brief bouts of emotional happiness seem to boost brief bouts of meaning. So that's a nice idea. But there's other ones that are, I think, more interesting. So I've done one where we focus people on using their phones or cameras to take pictures of what makes their life feel meaningful. And then that seems to help them clarify
Mm-hmm.
meaning,
Mm-hmm.
and maybe even take more responsibility for the things in their life that do feel meaningful. Other people have done, one of my favorites is nostalgia. This
Interesting.
Yeah, there's some laboratory research showing that when people engage in nostalgic thinking, meaning in life goes up. And the reason I love that is because theoretically that makes a lot of sense. Because
Mm.
something about meaning is our ability to integrate our past and future into the present. And so nostalgia helps us, is part of that process. So I really like that as well. So there are a lot of things to do, but the list is
Yeah,
really
that's
long, but
very
the
interesting.
data is
Yeah.
best on the therapy end. So
Sometimes the way how I describe it to my students when they ask me actually, how can they find purpose and meaning in life? Um, my simplest answer would go just pay attention to the experiences you go through and reflect. You need
yeah,
a lot
I
of
love that
reflection.
idea, because the one of the kind of circling back to what you can do for children, a key to meaning is having an active inner life. You know,
Mm,
like
mm,
reflecting on your experience, and not just kind of going on autopilot through
mhm,
life, or not, you know, it's like taking some responsibility for processing what your life is like is going to be a part of meaning. And I'd also say that with that tool that you're giving them, um, do a lot of experimentation with things that you
mm.
think are good, you know, like things that you think might be meaningful, or things that other people say are meaningful to them, and then see how it fits with you as you reflect.
True. Very true.
Yeah.
Yeah, interesting.
I also have to say though, there's one other line of thinking out there. People should stop doing things that are bad for them. You know what I mean?
Mm,
Like that's another thing. Like if you're doing unethical things, if you're doing mean things, if you're engaged in behaviors for terrible motives or that have bad outcomes, or if you're
mm,
in circumstances that you can leave that are toxic to you, like the message that you're saying in a sense, when you live in that way, when you live as a as someone who hurts other people or hurts the world, or who is, I guess, enduring a lot of unnecessary cruel treatment from other people, the message you're
mhm,
really sending in some sense is that my life, or life in general, isn't worth trying to do more with. So
mm.
that is going to undermine meaning over time, right? Like I think cruelty and phoniness and acting against our values all undermine meaning. So we can stop doing some of that stuff, and that should help meaning too.
Yeah, that's very important and very interesting to share. Thank you. This will lead me to the question when we talked about students. So, do you feel that people in general have shifted their attention toward understanding more meaning and purpose during pandemic?
I think so. There's a couple things I can point to. Well, first of all, the overall interest in meaning and purpose has really been accelerating. When I had started grad school, like I said, there were maybe 100 or so, sometimes 200 papers published in a year. And I think uh, just for my own, just people who cite just my research, I think that's well almost 4,000 people a year are citing my research, or 3,000 or something like that.
Wow.
So, and I'm just a small part of the big puzzle. Like you can't even track down all the meaning research anymore because it's just gone zoom. So that really began to accelerate in, I don't know, 2008 or something like that, and it's just shot up. So I think in general, what we're starting to see is a lot more people are interested in the pursuit of evidence-based approaches to meaning and understanding the research. But in the pandemic, that's of course continued. But what I saw for myself was, um, I mean, people had to really adjust. But I got a lot of requests to provide guides on what people should do during the pandemic to kind of get through.
Mhm.
Um, and one of the most interesting outcomes, I think, well, I don't know, I think I wrote chapters for 2 books, all about, trying to get through hard times. All of a sudden, that the projects were just launched because of the pandemic. There was a really fun article I was a part of in the Journal of Positive Psychology, where Professor Lee Waters, brought together a bunch of positive psychologists to write a paper specific about each of their research topics as pertaining to how to live through the pandemic. Um, I think I gave a keynote specific to the topic of meaning in
Mm.
the pandemic through a meaning lens. I think I must have given that keynote like, for me, this would be a lot for one talk, like 7 or 8 times, something like that, on top, in addition to the other topics. So I think people want to know what to do with it. And, there's two things you tend to hear in times like this. One is, it really makes you think and consider what's important in life. And I think
That's
that
very
that's
true.
been true. Yeah. And then the other is, nothing will ever be the same. And I think that is very not true. I think that we're going to go right back to the same, like we had a chance to really be around, we had a chance to reevaluate, and maybe we did, and maybe we found meaning in the little things again. But I think we're going to go right back to the
The same.
silly,
Okay.
frantic lives. So I'm a little worried that we didn't quite learn the right lessons. And also, I think, um, another sign that meaning and purpose has really become important during the pandemic is just how many people suddenly went from being happiness experts or coaching experts or business development experts into meaning and purpose experts, like just like that. I mean,
Just
there's
like that. Yeah.
thousands of
Tell
new
me about
experts.
it. Tell me about it.
Yeah, just,
Positivity
I mean,
ambassadors.
I know. I mean, somehow it's very easy to do. Like, to become a new expert in this field, all you do is you change your title on LinkedIn and your
And that's
profile on
it.
Facebook,
That's
and you're a new
true.
expert.
Nobody will do
Yeah.
background check, right?
Yeah, because I think what that says is that people were not interested in in grit anymore. They weren't interested in gratitude quite as much. They weren't interested in just
Hmm.
happiness. They weren't interested in some of these things, but they were interested in resilience. They were interested in meaning and purpose, like the sort of the heavier topics. And so I think a lot of people saw that's where the interest was. So suddenly they could meet that interest, and that's another sign. And hopefully they were doing good work, and so people can
Let's
really
hope
benefit
though.
from.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. At least mentioning where they got their sources from. Is it from a
Yeah, if they
research or
have
is it from,
sources, but yeah,
if they do have one? Yeah, that's so true.
we can
Um,
hope. We can hope.
that's only what we can hope for. So this will lead me to my last question, which is a little bit difficult and deep. Do you think religion and tradition are one of the major contributor toward one's finding their own meaning in life.
Yeah, I do. I think there's two lines of thought on this. One is that there is research showing that this is the
Mm,
case. There's quite a lot of research. I think the most compelling research that gets quite a lot to your question comes from one of my advisors. I got degrees in two areas, in counseling psychology and in personality psychology. And my advisor in counseling psychology, just to mention her, is Patricia Frazier, and she does post-traumatic growth research. And then my advisor in personality is Shigehiro Uishi, who is a student of Ed Diener's and does all sorts of well-being and interesting work on well-being, let's say. But he and Ed did a study using Gallup data, I think, from around the world, 70 countries, I think, and just, a yes or no question: my life has meaning and purpose, yes or no? And then relating that to things like suicide, religion, how many children people had, and other indicators of kind of more traditional lifestyles. And what they found was, and then of course, wealth of the countries, so GDP. And
mm,
there's a well-known finding that as a nation becomes wealthier up to a certain point, people become happier. What
mm,
they found was that as a nation becomes wealthier, people's lives become less meaningful. So in life, a smaller proportion of people said their lives were meaningful in a wealthy country, like the US or like the Netherlands or, like Norway, than did in less wealthy countries like, I can't remember if these are the exact countries right now, but like Nigeria. Nigeria's a pretty
mm,
wealthy country, but, or Chad, um, Peru, so countries that have lower GDP, there were a higher percentage of people who said their lives were meaningful. And there was
mm.
a higher percentage of people who said that they were religious. And there's a lower percentage of people who in the country had committed suicide. So the suicide rates were lower. So as
Okay.
GDP goes up, suicide goes up, meaning goes down, religion goes down, family
Mm,
size goes down. And so they did a mediation model. And what they saw was that essentially what seems to happen is that GDP goes up, religion and other indicators of traditional lifestyles go down, meaning goes down, suicide goes up. So that was the logic model that they saw. So that feels like really compelling information. And when I think about it from a theoretical standpoint, one of the things that this very, very fast-paced and globalized world is really good at is presenting people with lots of new ideas
mm,
over and over and over again, and calling into question things maybe they should be questioned, but they hadn't been really questioned on a large scale for millennia. Like the way that societies are structured, roles for different types of people, what how to understand gender, um, the how where religion, the true the verticality or the truth of religion, like the power of authority. All these sorts of things
mm,
have just been they've been heavily questioned. And so in my mind, I think what we're really doing is that we're taking sources and foundations of meaning that took thousands of years to develop, and we've gotten really good at diminishing their importance, and we
okay.
haven't replaced them with anything. Instead, what we've said is
Mm,
like each individual has to figure out on her own,
true.
and we don't give those folks the skills to do that either. So it's like we just have created a lot of chaos and a lot of doubt, and I think that is my guess is that that is one reason why conspiracy theories and ideology are so attractive and potentially even destructive right now, because if you take seriously that people need meaning in their lives, and you take away the stability of their society, maybe you even destroy their cities, and you destroy the economies, and you destroy the ways of life, you leave them with nothing.
Mm,
um, they need something. If they need meaning, they need whatever coherent message is going to give them a sense that their life is important, that they play a role, that they can affect a purpose in their lives. And sometimes those messages are most appealing when they're not so kind to other folks. And so I think there's a little bit of that going on, to be honest.
Unfortunately, yeah, that's so true.
And in some
Well,
cases, I will say, like in some cases, I think rightfully so, because a lot of what we've believed over the years. So we'll just take one example: the rightful place of European culture in running the world, right? You know, we're
mm,
still recovering from a few hundred years of colonialism, and you can see that it's important to question some big ideas that were really destructive. Like in my hemisphere, almost everyone who had lived here before European contact died post European
mm,
contact. And so thinking that there's something just so sacred about the way that the world runs also has a downside. Like, should we have let Europe redraw all the maps of countries, national borders throughout the world in the post World War II? Well, probably not. Why did we? Well, because Europe was supposed to be so
mm.
superior, you know. So like certain ideas we need to get rid of
That's
in
so
order to
true.
move forward. But we're not. It goes back to your parenting question. Like, what skills are we giving people to find meaning and know what
Mm.
is like a good meaning as opposed to a very poisonous meaning?
Yeah, that's so true. I mean, it is very important to foster how to communicate with each other, regardless of our culture, religion, uh, with human basis, values, like me respecting you for being who you are, not where you're from, and etc. I think
Yeah,
that's a very important topic people should actually focus on and talk about more,
yeah,
even when they, communicate on a daily basis.
yeah, I totally agree. And that's harder to do, right? It's
Oh
harder
yeah.
to do that than to just decide that everything that someone who's different than you says is wrong. That's a
Hmm.
lot easier. And it's interesting too. Like, I don't want to go too far into this, but one of the things I've noticed so I grew up in a part of the US that um, is in the north of the country, and sort of culturally, the North likes to think of itself as very non-racist, very progressive, you know. Um, and so there's this idea that I was not a racist because, you know, I was liberal, let's say, you know, or
Hmm.
because we're not from the south of the country. And the south of the country had this reputation as because of the Civil War, this long history, right? And it's like that belief system is still with us today in the U.S., even though it was never true. There's plenty of racism and evidence for it in the North. There's plenty of evidence of non-racism in the South and all this sort of stuff. But
Hmm.
one of the things I noticed when I moved to a city that was a little bit more in the south of the US, it's really on the border of North and South, was that you could, I would have access to white people uh, thinking and talking, and I would see that day to day life between African American Black people and European American white people was just really like low stress and
Hmm.
friendly, and the interactions were much less difficult than I observed when I was in the north of the country. But
Interesting.
then the but then the ideology that would come out of the mouths of some of the folks I would talk to, not all, but some of the folks who were really nice in individual interactions with African Americans, would reveal in some sense that they were not seen as actually fully human either, like that white people were still
Hmm.
superior. So it's almost like it's easy enough to like a person and get along with that person and still reject everything about them in this like meaning level, right? We
Hmm.
can, because we still have to believe. To me, that really just demonstrates the power of these purposes, that we can have great interactions one-on-one with someone, um, and then still want to defend an idea that turns that person into an enemy of some sort.
Hmm.
Does
Hmm.
that make
It
sense?
makes
Like we
sense.
still need,
Okay.
yeah, there's still some there's still something going on beyond like the positive relationships, the connection, the belongingness, like that psychological need. There's still something that isn't met just by having good interactions with other people. Like we still want to know what our place is in the world. And there's plenty of ideologies out there that tell us our place is really special and everyone else's place is beneath you. And they're
Yeah.
not quite as good as you. So I don't know. Like I've been struggling
So,
with
so
that a
it's
lot because
it's like giving ourselves the right to label others.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. And then we don't have to question that part of it. It's easy to get along with a person who wants to get along with you. It's
Mm-hmm.
hard to think complexly about a world where a good person can believe in one approach to God or many gods, and you can believe a very different approach to God or many gods, and that you can both be right somehow, or it's okay
Mm-hmm.
if you disagree on this most fundamental question of what is the nature of life. Like that's harder, I think. You know what I mean? To like both interact with someone, or maybe even have an argument with someone about this, and then still respect their dignity as a human being from
Mm-hmm.
a really true and purposeful place. So I think that that's a real challenge going forward as we continue to fragment, and we're going to continue to see all sorts of, I think, geopolitical strains that are going to really push antagonism, like we've seen in the U.S. towards Asian Americans, for example, since
Mm.
our anyway. So there's going to be a lot of that work to do to bridge gaps. And it's really interesting, right? Because I know that I've got friends in Israel who have made their first trip to an Arabic country in UAE over the last couple of
Yes,
years since that progress. And that's really, really exciting. And what's even more exciting is to see how like what comes next with that. So there's always signs of hope and always signs of fear, I think.
I believe that too. This brings me to the end of our episode for our happiness research talk. Thank you so much, Professor, um, to be part of our talk. And we're super glad to have you, to be honest. I've been following your work, and your work is very, very much inspiring.
Well, thank you so much for your kind words and for having me here today. I really enjoyed it.